This will be the beginning of Creation Science 102, our second class. In the first 10-week course, we talked about the age of the Earth and the Big Bang Theory and things that are in my seminar parts 1 and 2A. And we left off in the middle of talking about the cavemen. We left off talking about Jack Cuozzo and his tremendous book, Buried Alive, which is just about the Neanderthal men. Jack Cuozzo is a dentist. He studied all of them, went and saw the actual bones instead of the reproductions, or what most people see is just a casting. And he has pictures in here showing how that they've been constructed wrong, and they're just normal humans who have diseases like rickets and arthritis and acromegaly and things like that. By the way, in case you don't know, the Neanderthal, the H is silent, Neanderthal man is named after the Neander Valley, which was named after Joachim Neander, who was a German Christian who used to wander through that valley, and he composed a song that's in our songbook. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. O my soul, praise Him, for He is thy health and salvation. He's the one who wrote that song, and Neander Valley is named after him. And of course, Satan likes to counterfeit or undo all the good that the Lord does, so now we have Neanderthal man named after the same valley, because that's where it was found. The first one was found in 1856. Shortly thereafter, Charles Darwin's book came out, and evolution became a popular theory. When the Neanderthal man was first found, it was classified by the experts who studied it as a human who probably drowned in the flood. They said he had received several blows to the head because there were some bumps on his head where he had been hit pretty hard and healed. And he had several diseases. I think he said he suffered from rickets in old age and some other disease, or rickets in childhood and arthritis in old age. That was the analysis of the skeleton. And that analysis is still valid today. But because they don't have any other missing links, they've decided to use Neanderthal man as a missing link when it's not at all. It's just 100% human. Recently, there was a study done that said the Neanderthal DNA is 3 or 4% different than average human DNA. I'm not sure exactly what they studied about the DNA, but that's now the big thing in the news, that Neanderthal man is not even part of the human lineage. When actually, the variation from normal human DNA is 5 or 6 or 7% either way. This guy's 3 or 4% off of the average, so he's within the range of human anyway. Now, how they can say, you know, he's not human, I don't know, but yeah, I'd recommend you get Cuozzo's book if you want to study more on the Neanderthals. It's just really tremendous book, well written. When he first began doing research on this in France, his life was threatened because this is big business. These missing links are big business for the people who make money off of them. You know, they've got these museums displaying these fossils, and people pay money to come see this, and he was saying, hey, it's just a normal human. And so his life was threatened. They chased his car. He had to outrun somebody who was chasing his car, trying to kill him. It tells the whole drama in here of what happened in the Neanderthals. Okay, let's talk about Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. Donald Johanson found Lucy in 1974 in the Hadar Valley. Donald Johanson was a nobody. Nobody had ever heard of him, and now he's a famous scientist because he found this Lucy creature. He admitted in this book, Bones of Contention, that he had received a grant of, I think, $47,000 to go look for missing links. So for him to say he found a missing link is like getting someone, a mother, to write a job recommendation for their own son. You know, it's a little bit of a slanted opinion. Of course, he had to find something. He was about to run out of grant money when somebody brought him some bones, and they went and dug them up and discovered Lucy. There's an awful lot of controversy about Lucy, and I want to share with you in this section just a little bit about Lucy. Hadar Valley is in Ethiopia. You can see it on the map right there. This is part of the Great Rift Valley. There's a crack all the way across this part of Africa, sort of like the Grand Canyon, only it's obviously a fault line like the San Andreas Fault, called the Great Rift Valley. And many so-called missing links come from this area in Ethiopia and down into Kenya. So this is a common place for them to go look for fossils or the so-called missing links. Lucy, when Donald Johanson found Lucy, he found 40% of the skeleton. Here it is right here. While they were digging out these bones, they were listening to a song that was very famous at the time, a rock and roll song by the Beatles called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which has the initials LSD, on purpose. The Beatles were very big into drugs. We can go off on a long tangent there if we'd like. One of the Beatles' songs, as they're singing whatever the main song was, in the background you can hear, if you change the speaker over to the left or right speaker, whichever it is, you hear some people chanting through the entire song, smoke pot, smoke pot, smoke pot, through the whole song, as a subliminal effect to get into the conscience of kids in the early 70s. On one of the Beatles' record albums, on the cover of the album, they're all standing there with their suits and ties, smiling for the picture. All around them is marijuana plants. Now, a lot of people caught that, of course, you know, but wow, it's marijuana plants everywhere. It looks like, you know, shrubbery around them or something, but it's all marijuana plants. They were very big into drugs. Anyway, Johansen was listening to the song as they dug it out, so they decided to name this skeleton Lucy. There is an awful lot of controversy about this. There are some who think, and have some pretty good evidence, that the hip bone actually came from a young African girl. It wasn't even part of this skeleton. It was brought later. You have to understand how these guys find their fossils. They will go to Africa and they will hire the local natives to go look for bones. And they will pay them if they're successful, and bring them some good fossil skeletons. Well, in a country where the people are starving to death and any amount of money is great, you know, there's a real strong indication that they're likely to bring in anything, you know, and try to get you to buy it, you know, as a missing link. So Donald Johansen found 40% of the skeleton. This is considered the most complete Australopithecine ever found. So one of the quiz questions will be, what is the most famous Australopithecine? This is supposed to be part of the missing links for, you know, A-U-S-T-R, let's see, we better look that one up. Like Australia, comes from the root word Australia. And then the last part is Afarensis, A-F-E-R-E-N-S-I-S, for Africa. Afarensis. The whole thing is explained in how they name them, etc., in this book, Bones of Contention, which is $13 through our ministry, or you can buy it for $13.50 through other places if you'd like, but it's really a very good book, and it's got a section on each of the so-called cavemen. But Lucy, there's Australopithecus there, A-U-S-T-R-A-L-O-P-I-T-H-E-C-U-S, Australopithecus, just to the right of the circle on the left. They have Australopithecus robustus and Australopithecus afarensis. Robustus means it's bigger and stronger, more robust, where that gets the name. Donald Johansen claimed that he found this creature, Lucy, and he found 40% of the skeleton over a relatively small area. I think he said 70 square meters is the way he described it. If I'm not mistaken on that, I don't know. But I named it Lucy because of the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. In National Geographic in 1985, an article appeared about Lucy. They pointed to this knee joint, the bottom part of the upper thigh bone and the upper part of the lower leg bone, the knee joint, and said this was Lucy's knee. Now actually, this particular knee joint was found a year earlier. It was found 1.5 miles away and 200 feet or 70 meters deeper in a totally different layer of strata. This knee joint, National Geographic labeled it Lucy's knee. 5 times they called it Lucy's knee. Now Donald Johansen, when he speaks on the topic, is very careful not to call it Lucy's knee, because it's obviously not. You know, it's found 1.5 miles away. But Tom Willis of the Creation Ministry in Kansas City area has a great article about Lucy's knee joint, and we'll get you some copies of this. Lucy remains at college. You can get a hold of Tom Willis and get all sorts of details on what really happened with Lucy's knee. Tom Willis went to hear Donald Johansen speak, and Donald Johansen was taking questions at the end. So there were no questions with 800 people there, so Tom volunteered to ask him a few questions. You know, was that really Lucy's knee? You know, and why did you allow National Geographic to call it this 5 times when it wasn't Lucy's knee? You're allowing this fraud to be perpetuated when it's really not. But the reason they like this one to be part of Australopithecine is because the bones are slightly bigger than an ape. On the far right, you'll see the bones of an ape, which are straight in a straight line. The lower leg and the upper leg line up. On a human, your thigh bone is angled because your hips are wider than your knees in your normal stance, because we walk upright, whereas an ape that walks on all fours or bent over, they have a different bone structure in their leg. And so your thigh bone is angled coming off of the knee joint. This one that they called Lucy's knee, actually the Hadar knee, was also angled. He said, this proves it's becoming a human. Tom Willis's numbers right there, 816-618-3610. If you want to get hold of Tom Willis, he's got plenty of material on Lucy, and really gives them fits over this because they're simply lying to try to claim all this is a missing link. But they're so desperate for evidence for their evolution theory that any evidence is good enough. You know, we'll take it, we'll use it. He said, because the femur was angled, that proves it is becoming a human and learning to walk upright. See, one of the millions of changes that would have to happen between an ape and a human is they'd have to go from walking on 4 legs, mostly. Chimpanzees can walk on 2 sometimes, but it's uncomfortable for them because of the way their hip is built and their back is built. They're more comfortable walking on 4. Plus their fingers and toes curl under. They're called knuckle walkers. If you watch a chimpanzee walking, you know, they walk on their knuckles like this. They don't walk flat on the bottom of their feet or hands like we would. They have the toes curled under. The femur was angled on this one they found 1.5 miles away that some claimed was Lucy's when it really wasn't. The truth of the matter is, any monkey that climbs trees has angled femurs. It's called abhoral, how do you pronounce that, Jan? You the English, you know, tree dwelling. Abhoral, living in trees. Tree dwelling monkeys have angled femurs. So it's not proof it's becoming a human. It could be just a tree climbing monkey that he found the bones of. Secondly, his claim was Lucy's knee was slightly bigger than a regular ape. Well, that doesn't prove a thing, of course, you know. The bones of a Clydesdale are slightly bigger than a regular horse. That does not prove it is becoming a truck. It's just a heavy-duty chimpanzee, that's all. And if the Bible is correct, before the flood came, the world was very different. People were living longer and probably growing bigger, and it makes sense that probably everything was bigger and stronger before the world was destroyed by that flood in the days of Noah. So Lucy is not a missing link at all. The St. Louis Zoo has a display up, a wax figure of Lucy. Now you got to understand, Lucy is 3 feet 6 inches tall. So when you go to the zoo, and I've been there many times, every time I go to St. Louis, I go there just to keep my blood boiling because of all the lies in that crazy place, trying to push evolution. For instance, when you walk in to this one section of the zoo, they've got Charles Darwin sitting behind a desk in his little office. And it's a mechanical thing, and he stands up and begins talking to you about evolution. And the whole zoo seems to be devoted to pushing this one theory of evolution. Why on earth does a zoo have to talk about evolution? Why can't you go look at the animals, you know? But they think they have to use the zoo to teach the boys and girls who come about evolution, and that's what they're doing at many zoos across the country. But actually, for Lucy, not one foot bone or hand bone was found. None. But on St. Louis Zoo's wax figure, they put human feet and human hands. No bones at all were actually found. Other Australopithecines that have been found all had curled toes. They were obviously knuckle walkers. And their big toe was separated from their other toes, indicating it's called a grasping foot, where they can actually grab a tree branch with their foot. You can't do that because your toes all line up, and you know, your big toe and other toes line up. But all the other Australopithecines had this grasping foot with a toe separation. But the St. Louis Zoo put Lucy with human feet on there. There's no telling how many hundreds of thousands of kids go through this thing and see this every year and are impressed with the idea, wow, they have evidence for evolution. And it's just pure propaganda. That's not evidence for evolution. A professor from Washington University said, the statue is a complete misrepresentation. And I believe they know it is a misrepresentation. That is a fancy word that means a lie. The zoo director of education, Bruce Carr, said, zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. I don't know if there's a pun intended there or not, but certainly would be one. He said, we cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression this exhibit creates is correct. Now, excuse me, Bruce, what impression are you trying to get across to these kids? Are you trying to make them believe there's evidence that apes turn to humans or ape-like creatures turn to humans? Is that what you're trying to make the kids believe? Well, if you really have some evidence for evolution, I would like to see it. I'm not against evidence. I'm against lying. And this is lying. That's not evidence for evolution. The Laetoli footprints that were found were perfectly normal human footprints. All of the articles that came out about this time, they found footprints in the ash that had hardened, ash from a volcano. Somebody had walked across it and left footprints, and it hardened, sort of like concrete would do. Well, these footprints were in rock supposed to be 3.75 million years old. Now this creates a problem, since those folks who believe in evolution have been teaching man did not evolve until probably about 1 to 2 million years ago. And here we have ash that they have dated at 3.75 million years old. We will get into later on on seminar part 7 of how they do the dating of these ash layers, and it's absolutely ridiculous how they date this with potassium-argon dating and the wild numbers they get. But see, the theory supersedes all the evidence in their mind. There's a great chapter in the end of this book called The Dating Game, showing how the dates can be changed whenever the need arises. You know, to make, if a potassium argon or carbon date doesn't fit the theory, well, you simply change it, you know. They can date it again as many times as necessary to get the number they were looking for to begin with, which is not science, and I don't understand how they can't see that. But they said this proves hominids were walking upright 3.75 million years ago. Because here you have normal human footprints. Now they measure numerous things about the footprint. The width compared to the length, what's called the straddle, how far apart are the right footprints and the left footprints, the toe out, you know, caster and camber like you do on a car, you know, the stride. By measuring everything about these footprints, they say they're perfectly normal, exactly like ours. But yet they said this proves hominids. Now why would they call it a hominid? Why didn't they say humans? Why don't they say this proves humans were here 3.75 million years ago? Now the truth is that layer of ash is not 3.75 million years old. That's all baloney. We'll get into that later. But even if they're right, by their own thinking, they should say, wait a minute, we found normal human footprints. This would be made by a normal human. Maybe that proves man's always been man, but they don't seem to consider that possibility. They said the form of his foot was exactly the same as ours. This is from National Geographic, talking about these footprints. It says, weight-bearing pressure patterns in the prints resemble human ones, footprints so very much like our own. Russell Tuttle, University of Chicago, did the most extensive study of the Laetoli footprints, as well as studying the footprints of more than 70 habitually unshod people, people who go all their life with no shoes. He found the 3.5 million year old footprint trails at Laetoli Site G resemble those of habitually unshod modern humans. None of their features suggest that the Laetoli hominids were less capable bipeds than we are. What he's saying is, you compare these footprints with people who traditionally go without shoes, they look the same. He said, if the G footprints were not known to be so old, we could readily conclude they were made by a member of our own genus, Homo. Now, do you understand how the evolution prejudice destroys their normal thinking process? If you walked along the beach and found some human footprints along the beach, you would conclude that a human just walked there in the sand, obviously, right? Here they find normal human footprints in the ash, but because they've already decided this layer is too old, therefore, we know it can't be human, but all the evidence says it was. But see, it goes against the preconceived idea. And this is an example, one of millions of examples that can be given of how evolution theory is protected against any evidence that might go against it. You would think a rational, logical thinking person would say, you know, maybe we should throw out the theory. Normally in science, you get a theory, you gather evidence. If your evidence contradicts your theory, you throw the theory away and you get a new theory. That's the way it happens in all branches of science except paleontology when it comes to defending the theory of evolution. National Geographic drew a picture of dark-skinned, ape-like people on top of these footprints. Now understand, all they found were footprints. How would you know the color of their skin? One evolutionist got all upset with me and said, well, that's because this is Africa. They're dark-skinned over there. Well, maybe so. But maybe this is a slight racial slam trying to imply that dark-skinned people are less evolved. Hitler certainly believed that. Hitler thought the blacks were inferior to the Aryans, you know, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegians. and Germans. And we'll get into more of that much later on seminar part 5 of my series on how Hitler's philosophy and racism tie together in evolution. But also, the artist for this picture for National Geographic in 1979 drew the footprints with a toe separation, trying to imply it is starting to become a grasping foot. See, your footprint, you couldn't grasp a tree branch and hang upside down with your big toe on one side and your other toes on the other side. Monkeys can, of course. And they drew this picture by making the toe a little further over than was actually found, making a little separation. This is called propaganda in my book. I think they should report the facts, and if it contradicts your theory, well then for heaven's sake, throw away the theory and get a new one. The problem is, many people like that evolution theory because it gives them freedom from God. And I'm convinced, after studying this topic for 30-some years, that's the reason they keep that evolution theory. Charles Oxnard studied every one of the Lucy bones. He measured every angle or every dimension of the bones and compared them. It's called a multivariate analysis. He spent, I believe, 16 years studying Lucy. He said, folks, the various Australopithecines, which is Lucy, are indeed more different from both African apes and humans in most features than these latter are from each other. In other words, Lucy is more different from humans and apes than apes are from humans. It's not a missing link at all. It's just an unusual monkey, that's all. So if anybody tells you Lucy is a missing link, you need to tell them they're misinformed. Or they're lying. I don't know of a nicer way to say it, but that's just the way it goes, okay? There could be some Lucy-type monkeys, a monkey that traditionally or commonly walks on 2 legs and consequently has a slightly different hip structure. There could be some still alive. It's just a monkey is all it is. I mean, several birds, most birds walk on 2 legs, you know, have an upright posture. The fact that if it walks on 2 legs does not prove it is starting to become a human. It proves God made a species of monkeys that walks on 2 legs part of the time, or most of the time even. But that Creation magazine is excellent magazine. Back in '96, they had a good article about, you know, is Lucy still alive? Down in Sumatra, which is down near Vietnam area, Indonesia. Experts will tell you there is really no evidence of how man evolved. By the time you get done reading this book, Bones of Contention by Marvin Lubenow, now, what Lubenow does in here, he spent 25 years studying all of the so-called missing links. Has a section on each one in here. He says at the beginning of the book, he says, I'm going to assume that their dating, I'm going to go by their dates that they give to these missing links, okay? If they say it's 1.6 million years old, okay, we're going to believe them. He said, I don't believe any of that stuff, but we're going to go by their teaching. And so just by their own teaching, he shows that the dates are totally wrong. They overlap each other. You have the children existing before the grandparents. You know, by the way that they say they evolved, it just doesn't work. So it really is an interesting expose on that topic. I recommend you read that one for down on the so-called missing links. The only missing link I've been able to find is modern man. He's definitely got something missing between his ears. He thinks we came from an ape-like ancestor. He spends all his spare time digging in the dirt looking for bones. My dog does the same thing, but we don't make the taxpayers pay his salary while he does it. It'd be the major difference. But they seem to be so desperate to worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, just like Romans chapter 1 says. These folks really don't like the idea of God creating the world. The Bible says they profess themselves to be wise, but they're fools. It's a shame. And they are not the enemy. Those who believe in evolution are not the enemy. We need to love them and pray for them and witness to them, and they can be saved like anybody else. They're blinded by the devil. I'm convinced of that. I was in a debate several months ago, and this professor was up there saying, folks, we've got proof for evolution. We found this fossil. You know, it wasn't Lucy, it was another one. We found this fossil, and this proves man came from an ape-like ancestor. When it was my turn, I got up and I said, folks, I'd like to point out the obvious. If this was a court of law, and this guy came in and says, Judge, we have evidence that apes turned to humans, and here's the fossil we found in the dirt. I would say, Your Honor, it's pretty obvious. If you find a fossil in the dirt, all you know is it died. You don't know that it had any kids, do you? You find a skeleton in the dirt. You don't know that it had any kids. You certainly don't know that it had different kids. And why do they think the bones in the dirt can do something the animals today cannot do? Every kind of animal in the world produces after its kind. Humans have humans. Apes have apes. Chimpanzees have chimpanzees. If they think an ape-like creature could produce a human in the past, well, why don't they have an ape-like creature produce a human again? Only let's study it this time. I mean, I want to see it happen. It only happens long ago and far away, which is fairy tale material. Evolution doesn't happen. No animal has ever produced anything other than its kind. Now, you don't want to use the word species when you get into discussions with them. Just stick with the word kind and you'll be safe. Okay, we'll take a little break, and when we come back, we'll talk about where does the Stone Age fit into the Bible. What about the Stone Age coming up next? Where does the Stone Age fit into the Bible? Was there a time when civilizations existed with mostly stone tools as opposed to iron or copper or brass or bronze or some of the things we use today? Well, I would point out there are people today who use stone tools. There are what we would call Stone Age civilizations all over the world because that's all that's available to them. I think if there was a general Stone Age for the whole world, it would have been right after the flood, because the flood destroyed everything. When the people got off of that ark, they opened the door and walked out, and there's nothing. Everything had been ruined. I mean, you figure they stayed in the ark about 6 months after they hit bottom. How tall would the trees be by the time they walked out the door? You know, this tall maybe? Seeds floating around do just fine, float around in water for a few months and then germinate, but probably the extra 6 months, I mean, you can plant just about any vegetable and get it up to eatable size in a few months. I don't know what garden lengths are. I know up north it's a little faster because they have longer days than they do down here. So though they have shorter growing season because the days are longer, they end up getting their fruit in or getting their crops in earlier. But so in 6 months, you'd have plenty to eat outside for the animals. So that's probably why they stayed in 6 more months. There's simply no reason to go outside. Nothing out there to eat. But they got off the ark and faced just a ruined world. And so you don't tell your grandson, our fax ed, to go to the hardware store and get you a shovel. There aren't any hardware stores. There aren't any shovels. There's nothing. There is no civilization. Gone. It's got going and landing on the moon. So it's going to take a while to figure out where the iron ore deposits are, where the gold deposits are and silver deposits and copper deposits. You got to find this stuff, the ore in the ground. Meanwhile, you're going to get hungry. And it takes a while to dig out iron ore, melt it down, and, make iron tools out of it or steel tools. It takes a while to do that. So, meanwhile, you got to have supper. So it makes common sense that you're going to go make some stone tools, which are much quicker, take some hard rock, chip it sharp, and make stone arrowheads or whatever. So probably they faced what I would call a Gilligan's Island situation. Maybe other people in other parts of the world have not seen the video or the movie about Gilligan's Island. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen that, where they're on a ship, and the storm blows them off course, and they land on an island, and they end up, this crew of 8 or 9 people have to live there for years and years and years till the show becomes unpopular and then they take it off the air. But there's nothing to work with. So you have to use stone or bamboo or whatever you can find to make your house, to make your tools, to mortar and pestle. Everything has to be done out of stone. And plus, if you're a nomad society traveling around from area to area,